I moved to Maplewood Hills for peace. After 15 years in law enforcement, my life had been a series of high-stakes cases, dangerous undercover operations, and late-night stakeouts. I'd put cartel leaders behind bars, dismantled cybercrime rings, and even handled national security threats. Before we dive into this intense story, we have a small favor to ask. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. It's always incredible to see how far our stories reach. Thank you so much. Now let's dive in. And yet, nothing in my career prepared me for Karen. When I moved into my parents' home for a short sabbatical, I thought this would be the most peaceful few months of my life. Quiet streets, friendly neighbors, big front yard, coffee on the porch. It was supposed to be a break. But peace, as I've learned, is a fragile thing. It all started with Karen's watchful eyes. She lived directly across the street, and I had noticed her standing on her porch, arms crossed, watching me from day one. At first, I assumed it was simple curiosity. New guy in the neighborhood, whatever. But she watched too often. Every time I stepped outside, every time I drove off, every time I came back. She stood there, narrowing her eyes like a sheriff in a one-horse town. I ignored her. That was mistake #1. A week into my stay, I found a neighborhood newsletter stuffed into my mailbox. It wasn't a friendly welcome letter. It was a list of violations, each one highlighted in bold, all directed at me. Your vehicle does not comply with community parking regulations. Federal plates must be pre-approved before parking overnight. Unverified individuals may be reported for suspicious activity. I skimmed through it, raising an eyebrow. Unverified individuals? Was I a suspect in my own neighborhood now? Then I saw the signature at the bottom, Karen Thompson, HOA President. I sighed and tossed the letter in the trash. That was mistake #2, because Karen doesn't take being ignored lightly. The incident happened on a Sunday afternoon. I had parked my government-issued black SUV in my parents' driveway like usual. It had tinted windows, black federal plates, and a Department of Justice sticker, all completely legal. After a long day, I stepped outside onto the porch with a fresh cup of coffee, ready to enjoy the cool evening air. That's when I heard it. The sirens. Not one, not two. 3 police cars screeched into the neighborhood, lights flashing, tires screeching. The moment I saw officers jumping out of their vehicles, guns drawn, my instincts kicked in. My mind raced. Had there been an emergency nearby? A fugitive on the loose? Then I saw where the cops were pointing their weapons. At my SUV. For a moment, I just stood there, stunned. Then from across the street, I heard Karen's shrill, triumphant voice. "I told you, he's a criminal! He's been parking here for weeks!" I exhaled slowly. Jesus Christ! She had actually called the cops on my FBI vehicle. The lead officer, a serious-looking guy with a buzz cut, grabbed his radio. Suspect identified. Male, early 40s, black hoodie, gray sweatpants, possible armed threat. At that moment, I realized something very important. Karen wasn't just nosy. Karen was dangerous. I took a slow, controlled breath and raised my hands. Not because I was guilty of anything, but because I knew how these situations could go south fast. The officers moved in quickly. "Step forward! Hands where we can see them!" I did exactly that, keeping my voice even. "Gentlemen, let's take a deep breath before we do something regrettable." One officer, younger, looked uncertain. The lead officer narrowed his eyes. "Identify yourself." Before I could answer, Karen stormed into the scene, phone in hand, recording the whole thing. "Don't listen to him!" she shrieked. "He's obviously lying! I've been watching him!" My jaw clenched. This woman was unhinged. The officer hesitated. "Sir, do you have any identification?" I nodded. Right pocket, slowly reaching for it now. I pulled out my FBI badge, flipped it open, and held it up. For a full 3 seconds, there was silence. Then I saw the exact moment reality hit. The lead officer's face paled. The badge was real. The younger officer winced, probably realizing how close they were to a massive lawsuit. But Karen wasn't done. Before I could react, she lunged forward and ripped my wallet out of my hand. "Fake! Fake!" she screeched, waving it in the air like a victory trophy. "He made this at a print shop." The lead officer turned to her, looking exhausted. "Ma'am, that's a federal badge. Please hand it back." Karen clutched it like her life depended on it. "No, you're making a mistake. He's a threat to the neighborhood." I sighed. This is the dumbest situation I've ever been in. Finally, one of the officers pried the wallet from Karen's grip, examined the ID, and turned to the chief. Chief, we might have a situation here." The police chief, an older guy who looked like he wanted to quit his job immediately, walked over, took one glance at my ID, and rubbed his temples. "Agent Morrison?" he asked, his voice flat. I nodded. "The one and only." He sighed deeply, visibly regretting his life choices. "Stand down, he's legit." The officers immediately holstered their weapons. "But Karen?" She completely lost it. "No! This is a conspiracy! He probably forged that!" The police chief slowly turned to her. "Ma'am, you just falsely accused a federal agent and attempted to obstruct law enforcement. That's a felony." Karen's entire face drained of color, and for the first time all night, she shut up. But I knew her well enough by now. This wasn't over, not even close, because Karen doesn't lose. She doesn't back down. And when she's backed into a corner, she comes back swinging, and I had a feeling the real fight had just begun. I was enjoying a rare moment of peace, sipping coffee on the porch, when I heard my mother's voice from inside the house. "Jack, you need to see this." I turned, raising an eyebrow. She was standing in the living room, eyes glued to the TV. I stepped inside and felt my stomach drop. Because there, on the local news, was Karen. She was standing outside her house, tears in her eyes, surrounded by microphones. "This is a serious safety concern," she said, voice shaking. "This man, this so-called FBI agent, has been harassing the community, parking suspicious vehicles, and making us all feel unsafe." I blinked. "What the hell am I watching?" My mother sighed. "She called the news, and apparently she's got a lawyer." My jaw clenched as I turned up the volume. "We believe this man is impersonating a federal agent," the lawyer said, standing beside her. "We have no evidence of his credentials, and we are demanding a full investigation into his actions." "You have got to be kidding me!" Karen was doubling down. She wasn't just making a fool of herself anymore. She was actively trying to ruin my career. I pulled out my phone, checking my messages. Sure enough, my FBI colleagues had seen it. "Agent Morrison, what the hell is going on? You're trending on Twitter, bro. Did you piss off a suburban mafia or something? Fantastic." Not only was Karen still pushing her insane vendetta, but she was dragging the entire neighborhood into it. Less than 2 hours later, I got another knock on the door. This time, it wasn't the police. It was a group of Karen's most loyal followers, 5 middle-aged residents standing awkwardly on my front porch. The leader, a guy in a sweater vest who looked like he worked in insurance, cleared his throat. "Agent Morrison," he began hesitantly, We need to talk." I folded my arms. "Oh? About what?" He hesitated. Then he pulled out a clipboard, a petition. I stared at it, then at him, then back at the clipboard. "What the hell is this?" He sighed. "It's a petition to remove you from the neighborhood." I burst out laughing. "You're joking." He winced. "Look, it's not personal. Karen's been very vocal about this. She says you're bringing dangerous government attention to the area. A lot of folks are worried." I ran a hand down my face. "Worried about what? That their HOA fines are going to get audited?" No answer. Because they had no answer. Karen had whipped them into a frenzy, and now they were just going along with it. I scanned the list of signatures. 30 names. 30 people had signed a petition against me, a federal agent, because a soccer mom with a power complex told them I was a threat. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. Then I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo of the petition. The man frowned. "What are you doing?" I smirked. "Sending it to my lawyer and to the local police. This qualifies as harassment, doesn't it?" He paled. No, I mean, it's just a neighborhood concern." "Then you've got nothing to worry about," I said, smiling coldly. He took one look at my expression and backed away like a scared puppy. We'll just talk later." The group scattered like roaches. I exhaled sharply. This was getting out of hand. Karen wasn't just making noise anymore. She was rallying an entire movement against me. And the worst part? She was just getting started. That night, I barely slept. I wasn't afraid. I dealt with actual criminals, real threats, people who would kill a man without blinking. But this was different. I was dealing with suburban insanity, and insanity doesn't follow logic. At around 2:30 a.m., I heard something. I sat up in bed, instantly alert. I heard a soft rustling, a shadow moving outside. Someone was on my property. Big mistake. I slipped out of bed, moving quietly. No lights, no sound, silent, careful, calculated. And what I saw nearly made me laugh out loud. A man in dark clothes was crouched near my SUV, holding a screwdriver, trying to remove my license plate. I let out a slow breath. He whined softly but didn't move. He knew the drill. I didn't reach for my gun. Didn't need to. This wasn't a professional. This was an amateur, a scared little foot soldier in Karen's pathetic war, and he was about to have the worst night of his life. I moved quietly through the house, slipping out the back door, creeping through the shadows. He had no idea I was coming, and when I stepped out of the darkness, he nearly had a heart attack. "Nice night for a felony," I said coolly. He spun around, his face twisting in panic. I wasn't," I smirked. "You weren't what? Stealing federal property?" His face turned ghost white. I took a step closer. He took one back. "Who sent you?" I asked. His throat bobbed. I don't know what you mean." I leaned in slightly. "Let me guess. Karen?" The way his eyes flicked toward her house for half a second told me everything. I let out a low chuckle. "You're dumber than I thought." Before he could say another word, Axel let out a deep, earth-shaking snarl from the doorway. The guy dropped the screwdriver and bolted. I didn't chase him, didn't have to, because my security cameras caught everything, and in the morning, I was going to have all the proof I needed to finally bring Karen down. For good. The moment the sun crested over the rooftops, I was already awake, and I wasn't alone. Axel was at my side, ears pinned back, pacing near the door like he was waiting for round 2. I didn't blame him, because today was the beginning of the end for Karen. By the time I sat down with my coffee, I already had the security footage pulled up, and it was glorious. Crystal clear footage of Karen's lackey creeping onto my property, screwdriver in hand, attempting to remove my government-issued license plate. I had him. I had his face. I had his actions. I had enough proof to file a criminal trespassing charge. And the best part, I wasn't even the only one who saw him. Because as I reviewed the footage, I got a text from my neighbor across the street, an older guy named Frank who'd been watching everything from his porch. Frank: "Morning, Morrison. Hope you slept well." Me: "I didn't. You see what happened?" Frank: "Oh, I saw plenty, and I got photos. Want 'em?" Me: "Send everything." Seconds later, my phone pinged with a dozen high-resolution images of Karen's little minions sneaking around my SUV, clear as day. I let out a slow, satisfied breath. Checkmate, Karen. By noon, I was sitting in the local police station sipping bad coffee while a detective reviewed the footage. His name was Detective Harris, and unlike the officers who originally showed up to my house, this guy, he actually knew how to do his job. He leaned back in his chair, watching the footage play out, then let out a low whistle. "That's blatant criminal trespassing," he muttered. "Might even be attempted theft, depending on what he planned to do with the plate." I smirked. "And the best part? We both know who sent him." Harris sighed. "Karen." I nodded. "Karen." He scrubbed a hand down his face. "All right. We can bring the guy in, see if he rolls on her. If he confesses that she orchestrated this, we can hit her with conspiracy charges." I grinned. "Perfect. Let's ruin her day." It didn't take long for the police to track down Karen's minion. Turns out, he wasn't just some random neighbor. He was her new boyfriend. That's right. Karen, fresh off her husband filing for divorce, had found herself a new lapdog, a guy dumb enough to risk a felony charge for her. His name was Greg, early 40s, receding hairline, the kind of guy who looked like he still bragged about being on the high school football team. And Greg was not built for pressure. Because the second he was in an interrogation room, he folded like a cheap lawn chair. I wasn't in the room when it happened, but Detective Harris filled me in afterward. Greg tried to act tough at first, but when he realized he was facing actual criminal charges, he sang like a canary. "It was Karen's idea," he admitted, sweating bullets. "She told me to do it. She said she needed proof that his car was illegally parked. She even gave me the screwdriver." Before Harris could even open his mouth, Karen exploded. "Lies!" she screeched, surging forward in her seat, her shackled hands clanking against the metal table. "You pathetic, spineless idiot! How dare you pin this on me?" Greg flinched, his body jerking backward like he expected her to lunge at him. "I'm not taking the fall for this, Karen," he snapped, his voice shaking but determined. "I did what you told me to do. You said no one would find out." Karen's face twisted, her usual smug arrogance crumbling into something far more desperate. "Oh, please," she scoffed, rolling her eyes. "You think throwing me under the bus is going to save your sorry ass? You're the one who got caught, Greg. Maybe if you weren't such a bumbling moron, we wouldn't be sitting here right now." Harris leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, thoroughly enjoying the implosion. "You know," he mused, watching Karen with amusement, "it's always fascinating watching partners in crime turn on each other. So predictable, so messy." Karen snapped her glare to him, her face flushed red with fury. "Oh, shut up! You think you're so smart, don't you? You're just another pathetic rent-a-cop with a badge." Harris chuckled, calm, unbothered. "Yeah? Well, this rent-a-cop just watched you sell yourself out in real time." Karen's face froze. Greg let out a short, bitter laugh. "Yeah, Karen, maybe you should have kept your mouth shut." The realization hit her like a freight train. She had let her temper get the best of her. She had just incriminated herself. Harris tapped the file in front of him. "Well, that's about all I needed. Guess I'll be seeing you in court." Karen lunged forward again, shrieking, but the cuffs yanked her back. "You can't do this to me," she wailed. "I am the victim here. You hear me? I am the victim." But no one was listening anymore. By the time the police arrived at Karen's house, half the neighborhood had already gathered outside. Word spreads fast when the local tyrant is about to get taken down. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, watching it all unfold. Karen came out of her house, still in her ridiculous matching sweatsuit, sipping her morning coffee like she didn't have a care in the world. That changed real fast. The second she saw the two uniformed officers standing in her driveway, her smile vanished. "Karen Thompson," one officer called out, "we need to speak with you." Her grip on her coffee cup tightened. "About what?" she asked, voice clipped. The second officer stepped forward. "You're being placed under arrest for conspiracy to commit trespassing, harassment, and filing false police reports." Silence. The kind of heavy, crushing silence that only happens when someone's entire reality comes crashing down. Karen's face paled. Her fingers twitched. Her coffee cup slipped from her grip, shattering on the pavement. "You can't do this!" she shrieked, stepping back. "This is a mistake!" The officers didn't care. "Turn around, ma'am!" Karen panicked. She spun toward the crowd, eyes wild, searching for someone, anyone, to help her. But this time, no one did. Because this time, she had finally burned every last bridge. As the officers snapped the cuffs around her wrists, I stepped forward, just enough to let her see me smirking. Her eyes locked onto mine. And the look she gave me, it wasn't anger. It wasn't even hatred. It was pure, unfiltered fear. Because for the first time in her life, she had lost. And she wasn't coming back from this. Karen spent 3 days in county jail before being released on bail. But by then, the damage was done. Her divorce was finalized. Her boyfriend dumped her. And the HOA? The HOA meeting was packed. More people than ever before had crammed into the clubhouse, their whispers like an electric current running through the air. Normally, these meetings were boring, procedural nonsense, approving garden gnome sizes and debating the appropriate shade of beige for fences. But tonight, it was a war zone. At the front of the room, the HOA board sat behind a long table, expressions tense. At the center, Karen, arms crossed, face pinched in frustration. She still thought she could win. The board president, an older man named Carl Peterson, cleared his throat. "All right, let's get this started. We all know why we're here." A woman in the crowd, Mrs. Delaney, an elderly resident who rarely spoke, shot up from her chair. "Oh, do we? Because I'd love to hear Karen explain why we had police swarming our neighborhood." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Karen rolled her eyes, exhaling dramatically. "Oh, for heaven's sake, you people are so dramatic. Nothing even happened." "Nothing?" A burly man in the second row, Mr. Rodriguez, scoffed. "Lady, we had SWAT rolling up like it was a damn hostage situation. My kids were terrified," Karen huffed, flipping her hair. "Oh, please. If people weren't acting so suspicious all the time, we wouldn't need law enforcement stepping in." Carl massaged his temples. "Karen, do you even hear yourself?" Karen's eyes darted around the room, realizing quickly that there wasn't a single friendly face in sight. Then the real bombs started dropping. Mrs. Patel, one of the neighborhood treasurers, stood up holding a thick folder. "While we're all here, let's go over some of Karen's financials, shall we?" Karen's jaw tightened. "Excuse me?" Mrs. Patel flipped through the papers. According to these records, nearly $20,000 in HOA funds are unaccounted for. And would you look at that? Withdrawals line up perfectly with Karen's little vacations over the years. A collective gasp spread through the room. Karen shot up from her chair. "You can't prove anything!" Carl let out a dry chuckle. "Karen, we don't have to prove anything. The numbers speak for themselves." Karen's face went pale. "This is a witch hunt!" she shrieked. "You're all just jealous! You need me to run this place!" A young father in the back, the same man Karen once tried to fine $500 for having a non-regulation garden hose, stood up. "No, Karen, we need you gone." Carl sighed. "Let's just cut to the vote, shall we?" He raised his hand. "All in favor of removing Karen Hamilton from the HOA board?" Hands shot up. Every single one. Karen's face twisted into something ugly, rage and disbelief tangled together. She turned, searching for someone, anyone, to defend her. But the silence? That was the loudest part. Carl sighed. "Well, Karen, looks like you're out. Effective immediately." Karen stumbled backward, shaking her head. You can't just—" "We just did." And for the first time in her life, Karen Hamilton had no power. Within a month, Karen sold her house and vanished. No forwarding address, no goodbye, just gone. And the neighborhood? We finally got our peace back. I sat on my porch the night she left, watching the moving truck pull away. Axel lay at my feet, his tail thumping lazily against the wood. "Well, buddy," I murmured, sipping my beer, "guess we won?" He let out a content sigh, eyes half-lidded. And for the first time since moving here, I felt genuine, uninterrupted peace. No Karen, no HOA nonsense, just a quiet night under the stars. Finally, thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the story. Your support helps us bring more incredible tales like this to you. See you in the next one.